With my 35 years of experience, our team at U.S. Asset Management can deliver professional investment management, financial planning to help you target your goals, and even specialized divorce financial analysis if you need it. We are here to help you make better decisions with your money. Call U.S. Asset Management today, and let's get to work in your financial future. Do you already have your investments with Fidelity? I'm David Cross with U.S. Asset Management. Did you know that you can assign your investment management to my team and put my 35 years of experience to work for you? You simply assign us as your investment manager and you keep the same username and password. Professional management, and you get to work with someone who shares your values. Call U.S. Asset Management today and put us to work for you.
What happens in Georgia gets revealed one by one as the facts are unsealed. From the pit comes what they don't want you to see. When the daily nugget of truth is dropped with your host, BKP.
And we're back. I'm your host, BKP, and you're watching BKP Politics on voiceofruralamerica.com. It is good to be with you. It is Friday. I'm going to try to publish this tonight. Been working all day. Let me read this to you. And I witnessed everything Trump talked about last night. Wow, have I received the messages President Donald Trump in his address last night to the American people, and networks out there felt they needed to filter what you and I hear from the President of the United States of America. You know, sometimes the confusion sets in. I really do think it sets in that, yes, he is Donald J. Trump, the only one and only Donald J. Trump. But let's not forget, he is the President of the United States of America who won the election. He's not the President of the United States that they certified and swore in as the president. He's Donald J. Trump, the winner of the 2024 election. Now, you know, I am focused on, I am totally and completely focused on Georgia politics at this time. I've told you over and over that I will get back into some national politics because I'm paying attention to things and I'm not ignoring things. I just don't want to lose my focus on trying to win the governor's office in Georgia, the place that most affects, the office that most affects your and our lives here in Georgia. That being said, but last night, President Donald Trump, in his speech, let me say this. I'm working probably on 6 or 7 stories that's laying in these legal pads with hours. You are not crazy. You got it? I'm serious. You are not crazy. If you witnessed what happened on election night, and you said something is wrong here, you were correct. We'll get into that. I mean, it very much upsets me because I know people personally. I get upset because I know people personally that have been, you know, crazy, loony, That being said, all right, let me move along here, get this moving. I did attend Rick Jackson. This is one of the several stories I'm working on, and my intention today was to come in and do a in-depth analysis of yesterday, where Rick Jackson had his first rally in the general election cycle here in Georgia for governor. About 300 people attended. I wanted to come in and analyze it, look at it for what the media is doing, how they're trying to spin our election here in Georgia and manipulate it. But obviously, last night, Donald Trump giving his speech, I will try to work on this for Saturday morning. And right now, I think I'm going to have to work right through the weekend. Won't be the first time. Now, moving right along, you know, a lot of you can't see the background here. Okay, you can't see the background of what I have on all the walls here in the studio. But up here, yes, that is my Take Your Country Back Ross Perot for President. Underneath there is the Georgia Peach Ty Cobb, the Rat Pack. But right above it, I have up here my daily reminder, fraud by mail. So, you know, last night with the President of the United States on TV, can you see this hat? Can you see my button? This is the Georgia state flag, and this button, well, let me see. Let me get here's a close-up for you. Right? Stand with Trump. These buttons here, I had right after the 2020 election, 2021, I had these buttons made 100 at a time, and I would put them in my bag, and everywhere I would go, I would have these buttons that say, stolen, stand with Trump. Remember those? There's many of you out there, if you're new to the program, this is the first time, maybe you're seeing the button, but most of you out there, many of you out there have the button. You're wearing the button. Stolen, stand with Trump, and you got it from me, BKP. And, you know, last night as I was listening to Trump, there was so many things going through my head. Remember all of us that got canceled? You're talking about the networks would not air this last night. We'll get into that. But you remember what they did to the patriots out there? Remember, I lost my YouTube channel. I mean, with my revenue, you know, they canceled, you know, Mike Lindell, just one of the many, you know, they took down X accounts before Elon Musk, purchased, well, Twitter purchased X. They took down our YouTube accounts. I mean, Facebook took us down, Mark Zuckerberg, right? And I could not, I had my old microphone, I had a mic stand right here, and the cord went up, and I had the stolen button. Remember that in the Wayback Machine? I had the stolen button on the mic right here. So the entire program, you would see this button. I could not put that on there. They kept deleting my videos. They kept shutting me down because that said stolen on there, right? I could not say that on the air. How many things could we not do? And last night, the media, many of them trying to control the message, it just brought back to surface all those things think about all the people that, no joke, they destroyed their life. I mean, I have one friend that had a stroke, no joke. I had another friend that had, heart problems where, seriously, they were in court for years in one of these court cases and experienced, almost died. I'm not joking. I have friends that lost everything, monetarily. They were destroyed. And, I was listening to this last night and I was thinking, you know what? Trump, why are you doing this now? Or really, I was asking the question, why are you doing this right now? I mean, we're 4 weeks away from an election. But then again, he's only been back in office for 18 months. I mean, this stuff does not move like you would want it to move. And everything they had hidden, right? Everything they had hidden that has been discovered. So I've been thinking, why now? What are we going to do with this? The media last night. Trump's national election system falls catastrophically short. Trump nation's election system, sorry about that. Trump nation's election system falls catastrophically short, right? Now, I'm trying to wrap my head around this thing. So, I have the best sources of data analysts, not election grifters. No. I'm talking data analysts. They're not in it for the prize. They're not seeing how much money they can make. They're not seeing if they can emotionally whoop you up into a frenzy. No, these are patriots that are data analysts. And the reason I was late getting this story here to print this afternoon is I watched this last night. I watched the president. So I said, I'm going to go to CNN, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I'm going to go to CNN, and I'm going to watch it on CNN for the simple reason I want to hear John King, and I want to hear Caitlin, what's her name? I forget her name. I'll get it in a minute. Caitlin Collins. I want to hear their spin, their media spin. And I'm like, it's 9:00. Where's the speech? They were analyzing pieces of it. I was like, what are you doing here? This is the president of the United States addressing the American people. You don't get the filter. You're not the go-between. You're not the one that decides what I can hear. I'll judge it for myself. And then I noticed the president, 45 seconds, and then they cut back to the studio and they start analyzing it. I'm like, what are you doing? So I flipped over to Fixed News, and I say that jokingly, Fixed News, Fox. We'll talk about that in a minute. So I flipped over to Fox, backed it up a little bit, and I got the entire speech. And then after that, this may be upsetting to you, I wanted to see the reaction from the as you know, I refer to it, the mockingbird media, the deep state corporate corrupt media. So I watched MSNBC and I watched Jen Psaki. I then watched Lawrence O'Donnell. I then watched CNN, John King. I know what you're thinking, but I went over to MS Now, and I watched Raphael Warnock, the senator from Georgia. And then I watched Lawrence O'Donnell right after that. And see in the corner, you might not be able to see it, John Ossoff, the other sitting senator here in Georgia. I watched that. I wanted to see the narrative. And then this morning, I'll continue to upset you here. Not my intention. I watched Joe Scarborough and Minka Brzezinski. Their 3 hours. I think I got 2 hours in. I watched 2 hours of their spin. Trump's election denial has never been more dangerous. It's never been more dangerous. To who? To who? Whom? Who is it more dangerous? Okay. And, and I heard over and over and over, there's no evidence that these are recycled statements from Donald Trump. This is just old news. There's no evidence. And then I got another one here. The Chiron, as you look at the Chiron on the bottom, Trump uses speech to raise doubts about U.S. elections. So one has to ask themselves, did he use the speech to raise doubts? I don't think so. The American people have doubt. They just do. So last night, Fox and Friends completely ignored Trump's election speech, doesn't mention it once in 3 hour show. This morning, Fox and Friends they didn't talk about it. So before I go any further, I want to back up and put this into perspective. I talked to, last night I was close to midnight watching the spin from the deep state corporate corrupt media. And then today I probably have about 4 hours in discussion with election data analyst, real election data analyst, because I am not. What I analyze is the political spin, the spin from the media, the narrative they try to push, try to put out, how they're trying to manipulate things, get you to think different things. That's what I do. But I had to have this background. And as you were watching last night, you were not shocked, right? Now, they tried to hide this from the American people. Why try to hide it? Let it play out. Let Trump say what he wants to say. Let you look it up on the internet, because that's what you do. Every time something is on or Trump says something, that's what they don't like, the research spikes on the internet. It does. It spikes. People start looking it up. Now, so after I talk to all the data analysts, I want to come back And I want to address a certain group of people today. I want to address a certain group of people because you are the ones that were watching it last night. You're the ones that you lost your job, couldn't get a job. They found out you were an election denier, right? I received this text message, and I'm going to leave some things blank in respect for the person's privacy. At 6:46 a.m., I got this text message. I witnessed everything Trump talked about last night in blank county. I will never forget it as long as I live. I was in the courthouse. I wrote a synopsis. I testified at the blank hearing. I sent everything to the government. What they did in blank county, which is probably from China, they took voters who had not voted in some cases in 20 and 30 years, but because they had voted in blank county at one time, they had all their information to make them a voter. Now, these people may have moved in or died or left the country, but they gave them names to make ballots with. It gave them names to make ballots with. There was a pattern we kept finding on the absentee ballot or the mail-in ballot. A person who was voting for Biden, but hadn't voted in 25 years, but all of a sudden was voting for Biden out of nowhere. The pattern was over and over and over. It was orchestrated. I couldn't get anyone to listen. It was an easy way to create ballots under the radar. I brought it up to the clerk, and she was like, "Oh well, they voted in blank county. They voted in blank county before. They just reactivated their registration." Really, after 12, 20, 10 years, 18 years, they all of a sudden decided to vote again for Biden? By reactivating these old names, it flew under the radar. Drifters, homeless, they had voted once, but those names were used to make the ballots. It was easier than making new registrations and smarter. When I questioned the election official on this ballot harvesting, they threatened to call the district attorney and have me picked up if I didn't back off. Now they wouldn't have done that if they didn't know they knew I'd been there for 25 years. After every election, this looked different and they knew it. That's who I'm talking to today. You're out there. You're not crazy. You're right. Now we have the data analysts that know how to read this data, and they validated what you saw election night. And when you went home on election night and you tried to get someone to listen and you testified and you wrote it up and sent it to the government, no, you were not crazy. Because we have the people that stood before members of state house legislators and testified pristine ballots. I've done this for 17 years. And the ballots were all coming out pristine in the boxes, no frayed edges, no corners bent. And they were all going through for Biden. Story after story across America of citizens, patriots. You have to understand something. Up until 2020, and this is what you have to connect, all the data you're hearing about China, all the things that you're hearing, those are the smart people. And I have to tell you, I talked to some data analysts this morning that I had to say multiple times, back up and tell me that again, please. But they're so connected. But the other side of what they accomplished, besides stealing an election, with many other things, is moving you out of the way. You see, they know you, and you know who I'm talking to. You're not crazy across America. I hope this plays to every one of those people across America. No matter what happens in November in 4 weeks, you deserved last night for your president of the United States to say, you're not crazy. You sit there last night and you looked at the TV and you said, I know, I witnessed that. I witnessed everything he said. But here's what they wanted to accomplish. Because up till 2020, you had election workers, a lot of them, that worked in the election offices and precincts, voting precincts across this country. 20, 25 years, 15 years. You know the system. You know what looks out of place. But after 2020, so many of you said, I'm out. They made sure that you got targeted and you said, I'm out. I'm out. I'm out. The Biden administration, they went after me. They went after my family. They went after my kids. This is no joke. They went after my job. I'm out. You're not crazy. Thank you. I was so upset because I know those people. Now, moving right along, I figured I would get stuck on that. Fox and Friends. So, networks that chose not to run the speech live. And the reason I want to take a minute on this, if they will control the narrative last night or control what you hear last night, are you telling me they're not complicit in what they've done since 2020, these networks? You know, they're upset. They're upset today, many of these networks, because Trump has asked for their license to be reviewed. These networks opted out of interrupting the primetime television program through some regulated the speech to their digital streaming platform. So here it is. ABC opted out. They continued airing the game show Press Your Luck. Yes. If you watch ABC, you were watching Press Your Luck. That was more important than the President of the United States. NBC continued their scheduled broadcast for the Nature document, The Americas. CNN chose not to air the speech live. Anchor Caitlin Collins explained the decision to viewers by citing the president's well-documented history of false statements about elections. The network instead hosted a panel discussion on the topic. His well-documented history. They all chose, right? They all chose to make the decision for you. The network instead hosted a panel discussion. I thought, like, what's going on here? I started watching CNN. They would play a minute and a half and go back and start saying or discussing the well-documented history of false statements by the president. Who are they to censor what we hear from the President of the United States? They don't have that right to do that. I mean, how clear is it that they would alter the information that we get, right? These networks broke in to regularly programming to carry the speech, but pulled the plug mid-address. So CBS started the speech. They preempted its scheduled sitcom for the special report anchored by Tony I don't know his last name, but they interrupted a sitcom show that they had to air, CBS. The network delayed going to the speech initially, carrying it live for several minutes, and then cut away while Trump was speaking to return to a panel discussion. So as soon as they made a decision over at CBS, we can't let you hear this. You cannot hear this. They cut away to a panel discussion. MS Now, formerly MSNBC, host Jen Psaki aired about 15 to 17 minutes of the 26-minute address before cutting into the feed. For a brief period, the network utilized a split screen showing a muted Trump while Psaki spoke over the President of the United States before just cutting away entirely. Yes, Fox News did issue a disclaimer. Fox News issued a disclaimer. Even though Fox News was the only major broadcast network to air the entire 26-minute address without interrupting the live feed, the network did push back on the president's specific claims regarding electronic voting machines. The network's disclaimer stated, Fox News has not seen the evidence yet and is not in position to evaluate the accuracy of the president's statements and claims. This statement was issued in direct response to Trump's assertion during the broadcast that the voting systems are vulnerable and were easily compromised by foreign actors. Now, I'm going to get into this tomorrow. I'm not getting sidetracked, but there's a complete media attempt here. You see, this right here is Keisha Lance Bottoms in Georgia. New state Navigate poll, right? New state Navigate poll shows Keisha Lance Bottoms with a 7-point lead in the Georgia governor's race. Well, that's not accurate. It's not. But this is their determination. and what they want to accomplish. And I'll get more into that. Because here's the AJC. Donald Trump dusts off his How to Lose Georgia's playbook with 2020 rehash. Don't forget, this is the headlines. So in John Ossoff, tonight I heard a failed and desperate president. This is U.S. Senator John Ossoff. Tonight I heard a failed and desperate president who, as war spirals, prices rise, and as always, focused on his grievances, his shame, and above all, his fear of the accountability that will come with defeat. Now, let's break away just for a second of all the people you've been listening to that are data analysts. And I say that, I'm not telling you not to pay attention to those numbers. Let's drill down to common sense. Let's drill down to the truth that you and I know. Let's drill down to some of the things they don't want the people to hear. Yes, it's 2026. Yes, this was 2020. Yes, they say we keep litigating it. We keep going back to it. We need to move on from it. We need to get over it. That was never our intent. Let me be very clear. It was never when I say our intent, to still be talking about this. It was never our intent to drag this out to 2026. It was always, when I say our intent, it was always our intent to get the facts out, the truth out, indict people, prosecute people, put people in jail, whatever the truth coming out resulted in was always our intent. Not to still be here in 2026, not to still be talking about it, because as those out there that have 2020 election fatigue, you're tired of it. Okay? This is not a record that was set with an asterisk next to it that somebody cheated in a record book. This is U.S. American history where an election had been altered to create an outcome regardless of its people, the republic. Bottom line. What happens with the 2020 election, I personally don't know. Where it ends up, I don't know. Will anything ever be resolved? I don't know. Will we clean up the elections? Will they be accurate? I don't know. But I do know this. The truth has to be written in our history books. Or as they say, they worry about the democracy. They worry about saving the democracy. No, without the truth being written in the history books, for my children, my grandchildren, and their children to have this information to restore the republic for which we stand, one nation under God, this cannot go silent. You may be tired of it. Get past it. Move on. There's no evidence. No, that's what the media says. There's no evidence. That's what the networks say. That's what politicians say. That's what people that are protecting their political career say. Their corruption. That's what they say. Now, I want to get to the common sense. Seriously. Now, the election results, keep in mind, when you say China hacked, when they say China hacked and had access to what? What did he say? 250 million voter data? What did he say? I forget the exact number that he said. Don't forget, where did COVID-19 come out of? China. This is the COVID year, right? This is the COVID year. And, you know, there's no such thing as a coincidence in politics, but they want you to believe that during a COVID year, coincidentally, we had a presidential election with a president, Donald J. Trump. Don't forget, when I keep saying this, you went into Christmas 2019 with an amazing economy, everybody making money, interest rates really low, inflation really low. Don't forget, when you were putting up the Christmas tree, December 2019, before China sent COVID-19 in 2019, that was an amazing Christmas, right? They all are amazing Christmas as we speak here today, but that was amazing. Trump's president, the Trump economy, the list goes on. But they had to end it. Now, let me move on from that. Look at here. They want you to believe that Joe Biden got 81,700,000. Back up. Joe Biden received 81,283,098 votes. And Donald Trump got 74,222,958. That's what they want you to believe. They want you to believe that 7 million more, right? I had it here earlier. That 7 million more people. Now, look at 2024. Donald Trump, 77,303,568, with Kamala Harris, 75,000. If you back up and look, Donald Trump won the popular vote. He won 312 electoral votes. And he got 77 million votes 2024. But in 2020, he got 74 million. But he won the popular vote with 77 million. Now, there's a difference in 4 years of 7 million votes. You are absolutely right. Your observation is spot on. There were indeed fewer votes cast in the 2024 presidential election than the 2020. Why? Now, 2024, in my lifetime, I can't remember that much energy and enthusiasm and electricity with Republicans in 2024. I can't remember it, and I don't know how long. While the exact final tallies fluctuated slightly as states certify their absolute final audit numbers, the big picture shows a noticeable drop-off. In 2020, roughly 158 million total votes were cast. In 2024, the number dropped roughly to 155 million. Now, in 2020, Biden gets a record number. Here's the breakdown why that happened. This is what they say why that happened. The decrease in total votes was not evenly distributed between the two major parties. The Republican gain, Donald Trump received roughly 77.3 million votes in 2024, an increase of about 3.1 million than in 2020. The Democrat drop, Kamala Harris received 75 million votes. This was a massive decrease of 6.2 million votes compared to Joe Biden's 2020 total of 81 million. You notice the 7 million votes when they could not cheat disappeared. That's the same, go back and do the math. That's the same 7 million votes disappeared. 6.2 million votes, right? Compared to Biden's 2020, 81.2 million. So Biden got 81.2 million, and for Kamala Harris, 6.2 million disappeared. Now, the reason I bring that up, Trump wins the Electoral College. Trump wins the popular vote with 77.3 million. But that's only a 3.1 million vote difference than his 2020. But Democrats lost 6.2 million votes. Now, if you've got common sense out there, you know this is not accurate. Because in 2020, 81 million votes, it just didn't happen. We know that. I'm sitting there last night watching. Now, in 2020 was a historic anomaly. I got it. I think I got it. The 2020 election featured the highest voter turnout rate in over a century, with roughly 66% of voting eligibility population casting a ballot. It was driven by an immense polarization, people being stuck at home during a pandemic, and massive structural efforts to get people to vote. While 2024 felt like a drop-off. Now, I don't buy 81 million votes for Joe Biden. I don't buy it. And I don't buy a record number, because I will say this. Now, people had absentee ballots. But I think there was more reason why people just passed up voting in 2020 than any other time. But they want you to believe in 2020, it was a record number. The end of a pandemic era voting rules. As we discussed with Georgia and Pennsylvania, 2020 featured unprecedented expansions of mail-in voting to accommodate the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2020, roughly 43% of all votes were cast by mail, right? Fraud by mail, cast by mail. By 2024, the pandemic was over. Many states had rolled back those emergency provisions. Now, remember what I read to you earlier when we started. This individual said it was easier than creating a new registration. And this person knew it was easier to reactivate voters that hadn't voted in 12, 16, 20 years. Remember that. They couldn't do it in 2024. And 2020 featured the unprecedented expansion of mail-in voting to accommodate COVID-19 pandemic. In 2020, roughly 43% cast their ballot by mail. By 2024, the pandemic was over. Many states had rolled back their emergency provisions, banned the mass mailing of unrequested absentee ballot applications, and tightened rules around drop boxes. Consequently, mail-in voting dropped by 29% of the electorate in 2024. Without the sheer convenience of ballot showing up in mail, marginal or low propensity voters simply stayed home. No, they didn't. It dropped to 29% because ballots showing up by mail by marginal or low propensity voters, no, those were the voters that they reactivated. Maybe China, right? That they reactivated and got ballots for because there was no excuse. Georgia, they sent the ballots out. Anyone could get a ballot. Simply stayed home. That's not true. So when you hear them, the media, the evil media that held this back from you last night, that would not let you see it, and here's what they will say. They will say, oh, in 2020, you lost. But when you win, you're okay. When you win in 2022 and you take back the House, you're okay. When you win in 2024 and Donald Trump's president, you're okay. Well, no, 2020 was not an anomaly. 2020 was not an anomaly. It was an election stolen from the American people. Everything here, everything last night, you can paint this. Now, people don't want me saying this. They don't. They don't want me saying this in Georgia. I know right now, I'll look you in the eye. I know the elected officials, because you got to understand something. When I say this, like, don't preach to me. Don't point your finger at me. Let me explain something. They only have 4 months. That's it. What does that mean? Only 4 more months and they're through with Donald Trump. After November, right? No more worrying about it'll be midterms. Donald Trump will have his last 2 years lame duck. Donald Trump can say anything he wants about me. He could swear he's going to put up a primary opponent. A primary opponent will not want to get in the race with a Donald Trump endorsement going into. I'm just telling you. I have people out there in Georgia on the House, the Senate, the state level, constitutional officers. Shut up, shut up. We're only 4 months away. Please don't drag this into the November election. I didn't. But I'm not going to sit here and let the media continue to do what they did last night, the Joe Scarboroughs of the world, and the people look at you and say, well, it dropped to 29%. It was 43% in 2020. It dropped to 29% because the low propensity voters simply stayed home. That's not true. I read to you earlier. You know who you are out there. You watched that night. Trump was not wrong last night. Now, they will tell you Trump only did what he did last night because he wants to interfere. He wants to suppress. He wants to steal the ballot boxes. That's not true. The only thing the President of the United States, I want, you want, we want in this country is fair, accurate elections that we could certify and tell you who the winner is for any candidate, regardless of the party they represent on the ballot. Did you get that? That's all we're asking. Nothing else. No matter what narrative they try to spin out there, it's not true. Now, this being said, because we're going to go back right here. Here are the certified national results of the 2008 presidential. Barack Obama, 69,498, 516. John McCain, 59,948. Now, Barack Obama, whether you like what I'm about to say, you talk about COVID. You talk about COVID, right? Whether you like what I'm about to say or not, we had an enormous financial collapse, right? You talk about COVID in 2008. We had a major financial collapse in this country. Stock market collapse. Lehman Brothers closed, right? Cash for clunkers. Obama gets in there, cash for clunkers. We had General Motors going bankrupt. We had Chrysler being sold to an Italian bicycle company. Ford going bankrupt. I think the economic crisis may have been worse then than during COVID, but those are two different things to discuss. Barack Obama was popular at that time. George W. Bush is leaving. John McCain is not someone Republicans are excited about. But Barack Obama, pains me to say it, was very popular at that time. And they want you to believe, always remember what they want you to believe and to soak in is this bumbling guy, Joe Biden, that could never get over 2%. He ran for president 3 times in the past, maybe. He could never get over 3% of the vote. He had to drop out every time. Became his vice president and so popular. Now, normally, when I say normally, when someone leaves office and you're going to say, well, Trump did it, Trump was an anomaly. There, we can use the word with Trump. He was the anomaly, right? Not the election results. But generally, someone like a Joe Biden for vice president for 8 years with Barack Obama does not come back 4 years later and become the most popular, largest vote percentage win 81 million votes in a century. It just doesn't happen without something wrong. I want to do the whole broadcast in common sense today. The entire broadcast, common sense. And that's why they didn't want you to hear that, because you know it. Now, Barack Obama, 69,000, it's not real. Now, remember what happened in 2020. We're not going to relitigate it, but we're going to bring up a couple things. His office mailed out ballot applications for 6.9 million active registered voters ahead of the state's primary election. So Brad Raffensperger, remember that, before the primary, mailed out just 6.9. And what happened after that, Raffensperger, on March 24, 2020, Raffensperger issued an official press release titled, "Raffensperger takes unprecedented steps to protect safety and voter integrity in Georgia," outlining his legal and moral rationale. So in the primary, he sends out everyone, I think, ever on the voter rolls, maybe in the state of Georgia, 6.9 absentee ballots, boom, out in the mail. Or request. You can make the request. He sends out the request application. Now, by the time the 2020 general rolls around, he did not do that. But what he did in times of turbulence and upheaval, like the one we Georgians face, require decisive action. This is Raffensperger, right? Brad Raffensperger, Secretary of State of Georgia. Times of turbulence and upheaval, like the one we Georgians face, require decisive action, in the liberties we hold so dear are to be preserved. I am acting today because the people of Georgia, from the earliest settlers to heroes like Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and Congressman John Lewis, have fought too long and too hard for their right to vote to have it curtailed. The release further explained the public health reasoning behind his decision. Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger is moving to increase Georgia voter access to protect the public health of voters and poll workers during the COVID-19 emergency through increasing mail-in voting with social distancing, and most important tool for limiting the spread of coronavirus, providing alternatives to voting in person is crucial. Now, remember, on these voter rolls across America in 2020, the names were in the system that hadn't voted in 12, 15, 20, 25 years, whatever. But the names were in the system across America. And when I read this to you in a minute, when they say China can buy the voter rolls, let me tell you something. If you buy a public voter roll, now keep this in mind. So the media is out there spinning, Republicans are out there spinning, hey, what he's saying is China had voter rolls. You know, you can buy them. You can buy voter rolls. There's a difference in the voter roll that is sent to the public and the voter rolls in the system if it's hacked. Because there's some areas you're not going to see on the voter rolls. Social Security numbers, the list goes on. But if you hack the system to get the voter rolls, you get a lot more information The aftermath. Now, what happened was, remember, in Georgia, we had these third parties that then sent out absent ballot requests. Got the voter rolls. We don't know where all these third parties got this information, but they were sending in absentee ballot requests. No questions asked, they get them. Those third-party mailings during the general election are what caused much of the subsequent controversy. Because multiple different organizations were sending out forms, many Georgia voters received several duplicate applications in the mailbox, which led to confusion and suspicion of fraud. This specific issue, now here's where they tell you, remember this, here's where they tell you that in-person mail-in voting went from 43% down to 29%. This specific issue, third-party flooding mailboxes with duplicate request forms during the 2020 general election, directly led to Georgia legislature passing a massive new election law, SB 202, in 2021. The law now explicitly bans government officials from sending unrequested applications and imposed steep fines on third-party groups that mail applications to voters who have already requested ballots. Now, I know what you're going to say. Well, all this you're talking about, you're not talking about the machines, the vulnerabilities in the machines. We'll talk about that in a minute. But fraud by mail. Now, remember, every time they tell you, I'm not pleased that SB 202 did what we needed to do to secure elections in Georgia. But I will say this, all across the country, immediately after 2020, they would never admit it, but they know, wait a minute, the fraud, wait a minute, the foreign governments that may have the data. When someone says to you that people show up in a voter roll and they come out and then they get inserted back in and they come out, they're not crazy. They're not. Just saying. Now, what happened was, in third-party groups that mail applications to voters who have already requested ballots. Already requested ballots. Reduction in mail-in voting. So every time they say to you, well, wait a minute, you lost in 2020, but you started winning, and that's okay. Now, I want to go out of the state of Georgia just for a second, because last night there's been a lot of talk, well, Trump didn't say Georgia and Trump didn't say this state and whatever. And a lot of times Georgia gets what I call the bad rap from the media. It's always like Georgia, like we will not be quiet in Georgia. Remember, in Pennsylvania, they passed Act 77. Let me remind you. Now, in 2016, Hillary Clinton loses Pennsylvania to Donald Trump, 2016. Right? 2020, Joe Biden, they want you to believe, won Pennsylvania, and then go back to 2024, Donald Trump wins Pennsylvania. I don't have time to take on Arizona and Michigan and Wisconsin today. Act 77 fundamentally transformed the timeline, volume, and processing of ballots in Pennsylvania during the 2020 election. Now, I could spend hours talking about Georgia and Republicans. That everything happened in 2020. Republicans, sorry about that. Everything that happened in 2020, Republicans held the state house, state senate, and the governors. But don't forget, in Pennsylvania, although the governor was a Democrat, Tom Wolf, in the state of Pennsylvania, Republicans held the House and held the Senate. State of Pennsylvania. Act 77 fundamentally transforms the timeline in 2020 election. Passed in late 2019, the law was indeed a bipartisan compromise. The Republican-controlled legislature wanted to eliminate straight ticket voting, and Democrat Governor Wolf wanted to expand voter access. The most significant provision they agreed upon was creating no excuse mail-in voting. Act 77. Right? A change enacted just months before COVID-19 pandemic made the method highly sought after. Here is the Act 77 affected ballots for 2020. This is Pennsylvania. A massive surge in mail-in volume. Before Act 77, Pennsylvania voters needed a qualifying excuse. Before Republicans did this, Pennsylvania voters needed a qualifying excuse. Now, that brings us to no excuse absentee ballots. It has to stop. Like an illness or being out of town. To get an absentee ballot, Act 77 allowed anyone to request a mail-in ballot combined with the pandemic. This led to an unprecedented volume of paper. Over 2.6 million mail-in ballots were cast in Pennsylvania in 2020, representing 38% of the total vote. Now remember that as we go on. 38% of the total vote was mail-in ballot in 2020 in Pennsylvania. Now, the partisan divide. While the law was passed with Republican support, the utilization of mail-in ballots in 2020 split heavily along party lines, following messaging from party leaders. Democrats overwhelmingly embraced no excuse absentee ballots, while Republicans overwhelmingly preferred to vote in person on Election Day. Now remember, they have twisted this around, and the algorithm, you hear algorithm all the time. Now it's early voting, vote by mail, and Republicans need to do the early voting, not Election Day. Preferred to vote in person on Election Day. Of the mail-in ballots returned, remember this? Roughly 3/4 were cast by registered Democrats. So out of 38% of that mail-in vote, 3/4 of that were Democrats, not Republicans. Maybe it was those Democrats that hadn't voted in 12, 15, 20 years that were created. The red mirage and blue shift. Remember this? Remember this that night? Act 77 most visible impact on 2020 election is how it delayed the results. While the law allowed millions of people to vote by mail, it did not allow the early processing known as pre-canvassing. Under the law, county election workers were legally forbidden from opening the mail-in envelopes verifying the signatures, or flattening the ballots to be scanned until 7 a.m. Election Day. Because workers were busy managing the in-person voting on Election Day, the bulk of the 2.6 million mail-in envelopes sat untouched until that night. This created a specific counting sequence. Remember when we went to bed across America, whether it's Georgia, remember the next day, I think Brad Raffensperger, I don't have the video, went on with Chuck Todd. Was it with Chuck Todd? It said, we've only got like 2% of the ballots still out. And I can't quote Brad Raffensperger, but it's not going to change the outcome. Remember, at that time, Trump is winning. It's these ballots. Because workers were busy managing in-person voting on Election Day, the 2.6 million mail-in votes envelopes set untouched. Election night, counties reported the in-person votes first. Because Republicans heavily voted in person, initial totals showed a massive lead for Donald Trump, often referred to as the Red Mirage. Remember the Red Mirage? The following days, as election workers spent the next 3 days manually opening and scanning the millions of ballots, which heavily favored Joe Biden, the vote totals gradually shifted towards Democrat, the blue shift. Remember that? Now, okay, so everything we've talked about. All right, we've spent all this time, and you're like, wait a minute. Okay, yeah, we remember that. We remember that. Yes, we have common sense. You said earlier we're going to discuss this on a level of common sense. I've watched data analysts. I have watched the double scanned ballots. I've been to presentations. I have hours and hours. But what you're saying today, common sense to all Americans, this is why the media hid this from you last night. Common sense. Because you know why? And I'll tell you why. They almost, when I say almost, they almost have the memory of this suppressed. I'm serious. They almost have the memory of this suppressed. Bottom line. Now, when I say this, I can hear through the camera. Not me. I haven't forgotten one day. I got it. But don't take this wrong. You're in the echo chamber. You're in the circle. I ask my friends all the time, get out of the circle. Period. I'm going to show you some data right now. Now, people have fatigue on this. And the media did not want you to hear what Trump had to say. They didn't want you to relive it, because if you relive it, you remember everything I said. You remember setting up. You remember, hey, that's not right. You remember your friend that went through total living hell because they worked elections for 25 years. They worked it for 20 years, 15 years. And they told you it's not right. And you're like, something's wrong. They almost had it suppressed. Now let's get into what may be coming next. And we will see. So, half Republicans say the 2020 election was rigged. Now, when we get into this, could this just totally hurt Republicans in November? Could this be suppressing the vote? I sure hope not. I hope not. We are going to have a segment on just get the hell out and vote. Well, I heard this and I heard this, and no, I don't care. You're going to go out and vote. You're going to go out and vote if we have to drag you out. well, my vote doesn't count. There's no use. I quit. I'm not trying. One more time for the Gipper, okay? Just saying. Now, so did last night suppress the vote? Don't know. Did it invigorate Democrats? Or are Democrats going to be in fear of not trying to duplicate 2020? I mean, what's it going to be? Half of this is from YouGov, The Economist. This is from The Economist YouGov poll. This is a poll, January 16th, 2026. All right. This was taken January 16th, 2026. Half of Republicans say the 2020 election was rigged. This week's Economist YouGov poll finds sharp divides in public confidence in U.S. elections. Now, keep that in mind, confidence. Now, they want you to believe you should have confidence in your elections. And they want you to believe all these people that have been going out there and trying to say, we want to make sure we have accurate, fair elections, that when we certify them, we know the truth of which candidate actually won the election, regardless of the party. That they want you to think all those people are nuts. They're not. You're not crazy. Told you that earlier. Public confidence in U.S. elections, with Democrats and Republicans holding vastly different views on the legitimacy of the 2020 election, the credibility of Donald Trump's recent election rig claims, and the expectations of expectations for the fairness of future elections. 28% of Americans, including 50% of Republicans, and only 9% of Democrats, believe that the 2020 presidential election was rigged. Now, I'm going to tell you something. You may not think this, but if 28% of Americans, if that's the general number, think the 2020, after 6 years, on June 16th, 2026, this proves exactly what I just said to you. Proves it. Look you right in the eye. Proof. Boom. There it is. What I just tell you. They almost had the memory suppressed. Almost. But in June 16th, 2026, still 28%. That's enormous. That's enormous. There's no way 28% of Americans should ever feel, especially 6 years after the fact, that an election was stolen. And if all the networks, if everyone would have just played the speech, it would have reminded you maybe more than 28%. Including 50% of Republicans and only 9% of Democrats believe the 2020 presidential election was rigged. Republicans who identify as MAGA supporters are about twice as likely as non-MAGA Republicans to think the election was rigged, 66% to 32%. Yes, we do have a very big percentage in the Republican Party that want to move on. A very big percentage in the Republican Party is saying, we're only 4 months away from no more Trump influencing or being instrumental in our daily life in politics. He can't affect our career anymore. We've had to pretend for years that we support this guy and it's almost over. That's what some of them think. Half of the Republicans think the 2020 presidential election was rigged. Now, when you look at this, I know you can't see it on the screen, the purple, U.S. adult citizens, 28%, 19% not sure. Now, 19%, this is the general. This is a YouGov poll, 28% of Americans today still think the 2020 election was rigged. 19% could flip a coin. I'm not really sure. I mean, there's a lot of talk. There's a lot of smoke. There's a lot of chatter. I'm in the 19%. Maybe if ABC or NBC or maybe if, one of the networks would have aired it and I would have watched it, and maybe if we would have treated it like the old days, because I'm a little older than some of you, but like the old days where you sit down, you watch the president of the United States address the American people, maybe some of that 19% would have shifted over to yes. I'm telling you, I prove what I can say. I'm saying everything I say here. How's that going? By party, only 9% of Democrats, 77% of Republicans. Independents, 23% say yes. 23% say I don't know. That's 46%. In the independent vote, right? Independent voters, 23% of them say yes, it was rigged. And this is June 16th, right? With numbers like this, right? Because this was June 16th. Yesterday was July 16th. This is exactly why they didn't want Trump to speak to the American people. And this is why they don't want to talk about the Save America Act. Independents, 23%, not sure. 54%, no, I don't think so. Republicans, all right, just in Republicans, 50% say yes, 20% say not sure, 30% say no. That 30% out there, that's in the lane. I got to give you, just say in Georgia, let me look at this. The question is, half of Republicans, do you think the 2020 presidential election was rigged? Remember, that's the question. Let me focus on Georgia for a minute. Do you think the 2020 presidential election was rigged? 50% of Republicans say yes. 20% say not sure. 30% say no, Republicans. Now, you have to have all those Republicans to win an election in Georgia. That's the tightrope we're walking. Identification as a MAGA Republican. MAGA Republicans, 66% say yes. 12% say I don't know. 23% say no. And identify non-MAGA. Non-MAGA, 32% yes. 24% not sure. 44% say no. Now, this is another side of this YouGov poll. Only 1/4 of Americans are very confident the November elections will be conducted fairly. That you might say, well, that's not bad. That's enormous. 25% of Americans should not. 1/4 of Americans are very confident November elections will be conducted fairly. Only 1/4. How confident, this is the question on the screen, how confident are you that elections in November will be conducted fairly and votes counted accurately? Did you hear the question? How confident are you that the elections in November will be conducted fairly and votes counted accurately? 23% say very confident. Very. 46% say somewhat confident. And 31% say not confident. 31% in this poll say not confident. Folks, these numbers are enormous. Party ID. Democrats, only 37% say very confident, 44% of Democrats say somewhat, and 20% of Democrats say, I'm not confident. Independents, 16% say they're very confident. 43% say somewhat, and 41% of independents say, no, I'm not confident that they'll be accurate and the vote will be counted accurate. No, I'm not confident they'll be fair and accurate. Republicans, 18% are very confident. 54% of Republicans are somewhat. 29% are not confident at all, according to this poll. So, you can see point blank why they did not want you to see President Trump last night. You can see why they don't want to stir the memory that we've talked about today. You can see why they don't want you to be reminded in Wisconsin, Arizona, California. Trump said, you and I both know it should never take like 4 to 6 weeks to count votes. We know that, all right? They don't want you to look again at Nevada. They don't want you to look at Arizona. They don't want you to look at Wisconsin. They don't want you to look at New York. I mean, we could be, and people say, wait a minute, those are long shots. We could actually be winning races in New York and California, and we just don't know it. Now, they're going to try to run a narrative, and I'm going to get into that tomorrow, what it's going to do for the elections. And I know President Trump talked about the Chinese. Hello, all the 220 million voter files China hacked are readily available for you to get your hands on from various Secretary of States. Some commercial firms sell them too, with more information in them. Also, the president will sanction China, right? This is Erick Erickson, as I refer to him, the blowfish of Georgia, Erick Erickson. This is one of his, I've got to carry the water, run cover for the establishment. China hacked. Keep in mind, there's difference in the voter roll you purchase and the voter roll you hack. And on the dark web, you can buy voter rolls with information that is not legal. Moving right along. So, does he look Chinese? Just saying. Does Mark Zuckerberg look Chinese? You see all these mail-in ballots, the fraud by mail, right? Here's a photo of Mark Zuckerberg sitting with Donald Trump. They have met on a few occasions. I'm just saying, does Mark Zuckerberg look Chinese? Remember Mark Zuckerberg? The short answer is no. Federal government does not have authority. That's not the one I want right now. I apologize for that right there. Mark Zuckerberg, they spent, right? I must have forgot to put it in there. But you remember Mark Zuckerberg, the drop boxes, $400 million. They purchased drop boxes. Just reminder. Now, Markwayne Mullin, Department of Homeland Security, Trump administration live updates. Mullin echoes president's misleading, this is the New York Times, misleading election security claims, right? So let's go into some of the DHS videos from Mark Mullins, and we're going to take a couple notes one at a time. We're going to go one at a time and break them down. This is DHS Secretary Mark Mullins today. Going to get a couple of these up here. Let me get them right here. Go one at a time.
Program, we have a pending appeal because activist judges are saying what? They don't want to secure our elections? Once again, how is this a partisan issue? This shouldn't be a partisan issue. This should be that any judge and any God-fearing individual that loves this country should want to make sure that our elections are secure. And we have created inside DHS the SAVE program that allows states to proactively look at their roles. And so when you have 278,000 individuals that are non-citizens registered to vote, plus 400,000 that have already been identified just in 23 states, what can we find? We have all 50 participating with us. We will pursue maximum pressure on this. To let
Now remember what he is saying, these voter rolls. Now I will tell you this, I know the machines. We'll get into the machines in a minute. I got it. And the machines have foreign parts. And foreign parts are against the federal law. You can't have foreign parts. And that being said, but keep in mind, voter rolls and how we address this. Now, China hacking our system, you have the federal government. I'm an anti-federalist. I'll give you more detail later. But you have the federal government and you have the state governments, and they're butting heads right now because the states do not want to federalize elections, nor do I. But do states have the resources and the ability to protect against foreign actors? It's going to be a constitutional question. You need to understand what we're up against right now will be a constitutional question. Now, I like what he said, the SAVE program, but these activist judges, and he said this should not be, remember what he said, this should not be a partisan issue. And folks, when you have polling out there that says, when the question is, how confident are you in elections in November will be conducted fairly and votes counted accurately, and 23% of the people polled here say very confident. That's it. That's all you got. Very confident. And you have 31% not at all, and only 46% say somewhat. That is the basis for what Donald Trump has the right to do as president of the United States. This is for the people, and this is why he says this should not be a partisan thing. It should not be. This should not be Democrat or Republican. Now, let me go back here.
you know, we will be proactively program. We have a pending appeal because activist judge. We will pursue maximum pressure on this. To let you know, we will be proactively looking at early voting, and then after post-election, we will continue to scrub all those that did vote. Those states that don't participate with us, they have public records of those that voted, which is where we found the 250,000 from the 4 states that don't participate with us. We will go through those records one by one, and we will pursue everybody. We will make sure that people know they can trust our elections. If states want the grant funding, to recap, they must secure the elections. I want to thank President Trump's proactive approach to this. He has put together a remarkable team that not only is informing the public about what's going on, but we're also informing Congress, we're informing our states,
Now, a couple takeaways on this. Remember what he says. They're going to be proactive. They're going to totally scan early voting and post voting. The algorithm. They're going to scan. And they're going to watch for, you're going to see, they're going to watch for these names coming in and out of the voter roll. They will happen. They're going to scan early voting. What Mark Wayne Mullins is telling you, they're going to scan early voting. And they're going to catch in real time a name going in and voting. I know you think I've lost my mind, but that's okay. You just go ahead and think it. They're going to catch a name going in and voting, and then that name coming back out of the voter roll. They're going to catch all kinds of things like that. Now, let me put my disclaimer. I am not a data analyst. I'm not telling you anything here as a professional data analyst. So if you're out there saying, well, you got that part a little this way, or I get it. But in the grand scheme of things, well, always in the grand scheme of things, I'm correct. I just had to do that. Now, grants, federal grants. Now, what you're hearing, the states, especially the blue states, but don't get caught off guard. In Georgia, we have Chris Carr. We have the most do-less, do-nothing attorney general in America as a Republican in Georgia. His name is Chris Carr. And I noticed Chris Carr has been a little absent lately. And why is that? Maybe the Jackson campaign, maybe he's cooling his heels for a day or two. Because I'm telling you right now, what are they going to do when federal grants are stopped? Now, what states will do, states will say, you can't withhold the money, right? You can't withhold the money. This is all going to court over different things. You can't, they're going to go to the Supreme Court and say, can they withhold the money to help us if we don't do what they say, when they don't have the constitutional right to say we have to administer or handle our voter rolls, our registration, or our elections? It's all coming down to that. You will see. Now, I'm going to keep up with just a little bit more. We're almost done for the day.
That our foreign adversaries, not our allies, foreign adversaries have parts that are vital pieces in our voting machines. We know that they can access what they consider the key to the back of these machines. We know that they can change voter registration and your vote. We know it's possible. There's not a question. It's not even for debate. One thing that I love about numbers and I love about facts is they don't lie. This isn't something that I'm trying to tell you to spin a narrative. This is what is going on. And what we are saying is that every state should partner with us to work to secure this. Once we identify the problem, everybody should be informed. Working with Secretary Lutnick, we are going to make our security enhancements mandatory, meaning that if these states want a grant and they want to be reimbursed to work or to run federal elections, program, we have a pending, they're going to have to implement security issues.
What if you're out there in Georgia and you followed election integrity for all of these years? You're sitting here saying, wow, this is jaw dropping. J-A-W, jaw. This is jaw dropping. Like, are you serious? Because let me say this, foreign parts and vital pieces in our election machines. Now, in Georgia, if you're out there across the country, in Georgia, we are one of the only states and one of the first states to fully implement statewide electronic voting machines, electronic voting devices, statewide. We did it with Diebold, and then we went straight from Diebold to Dominion, statewide. So every single vote, with the exception of mail-in ballots that are paper, are done on machines that are actually these machines are illegal according to federal law, because we do have, you and I both know, there's vital parts and they're foreign parts in our machines. So what Mark Wayne Mullen just said in Georgia is our elections are illegal. Now, does that bother you when you hear somebody say our elections are illegal, when just last week, Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State, wrote an article saying, or told the AJC and said and put out a statement that our equipment is 99.99.99.99, whatever, right to the max, efficient, accurate, correct. Our equipment is primo. And the only issues we had were a fraction of paper ballots, hand-marked paper ballots. Right? So when you go from that to, hey, how do you go from that to our elections are illegal in Georgia? We have machines with vital foreign parts, and then the key access codes to access. Folks, almost everyone in Georgia has seen the access key on a t-shirt out there. It became one of the, I don't want to say a joke, but one of the biggest jokes out there. Everybody had a t-shirt with the access key, where key access to these machines is publicly known. Mark Wayne Mullins, DHS, just told you that, right? And we know, he says, it could, no question, it could change votes. That's what he's saying. He says it could change votes. No question whatsoever. Then he goes into partner with us for federal grants. This is all going to court. Everybody, this is going to court. You got to remember, this guy just decertified, basically, without using the word decertified, he just decertified our voting machines in Georgia, looked us right in the eye, and said, your voting is not legal, when we had a special session here in Georgia of our lawmakers, not even a month ago? Has it been a month? It was June 16th, right? Was it June 16th? When they voted to move the QR code out on SB 189 on the machines. I hope you're paying attention. This is not going away. This is the Department of Homeland Security. Now,
as Secretary Lutnick, or that our foreign adversaries, not our allies, with Secretary Lutnick, we are going to make our security enhancements mandatory, meaning that if these states want a grant and they want to be reimbursed to work or to run federal elections, they're going to have to implement security issues. Just security issues. We're not trying to get into anything else, but we're saying that the machines have to be secured and that your voter registration list needs to be scrubbed. We need to make sure that individuals that are legally able to vote are voting. We know that Iran hacked our state voter files and attempted to compromise, is the best word I can use, our systems where military members used to vote. So we're working with Secretary Hegseth and the DOW to safeguard those systems and protect our military voters. With Secretary
Now keep in mind what he just said. It'll be mandatory. Oh, this is going to court. If you want to grant federal elections, there's a reason he said federal elections, implement security, right, updates. We know that the machines that we use in Georgia are outdated. We know that they've not been updated. We know the machines that we use in Georgia cannot be updated. We know there needed to be a patch. We're here in Georgia. We know the Haldeman report. Every bit of this is black and white. We watched, was it Haldeman go in the back with a ballpoint pen and hack one of these machines right in court? And we know they can't be updated. We've heard the story about the patch, and you have to scrub your voter list. The reason he's talking about scrubbing the voter list, we go back to 2020, we talked about it. Inserting voters, bringing them back out. Not new registrations. No, not new registrations. A lot of them. Well, we'll let him go on here. One more.
Secretary Lutnick, we are going to make our security enhancements mandatory, meaning that
Sorry, that was my last one. I apologize for that. That was my last one. But now keep in mind, this is DHS, Department of Homeland Security. Now, he also said the Department of War with our military vote. This is going to the Supreme Court. Now, as we try to wrap this up, let me go back here. So, Trump administration live updates. Mullen echoes president's misleading election security claims. Everyone is in on it. All the deep state Mockingbird media, they're all in on it. Everything they want you to believe. This morning, after President Trump's primetime speech on elections, the Homeland Security Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen spoke at a news conference on Friday about the administration's claims about election vulnerabilities. He declined to answer questions about two fatal shootings involving immigration officers in the span of a week. Let's change the subject. Now, what you're going to hear the media say, well, Trump comes out last night, why you can't afford milk, why you can't afford coffee, why you can't afford insurance, why you can't afford gas, why you can't afford to buy a home. Interest rates are up, right? You only get shot if you go downtown. I don't know. I should have never put that in there. My apologies for that last thing. But you know what I'm saying? This is not important. What? Okay. Now, it's going to the Supreme Court. We are at a crossroads. We've talked about everything today. I told one of my friends, I do have one. I have one. I could have two. There could be a third one out there I'm not aware of. But at least one of my friends. I sent them a message last night just to fire them up. I mean, it is the one friend that I can fire up. And I'm not in fear they'll just totally leave me. I've had some pretend to be friends. I'm a Republican. They pretend to like you. Back. Okay, I'm back. So I sent a friend last night that I thought would get riled up. And I said, nothing burger, right after the speech. I said, nothing burger. And I got back everything burger. I got back everything burger. Everything burger. Call me. So I called my one friend. I do have two. There could be a third one out there somewhere. If there's a fourth one, let me know. And I called my friend and they're like, boom, 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 boom. You wait and see. And I enjoyed it. Now, I didn't get this individual all riled up, but I wanted to make this person say some things to me. It was great. But anyhow, so here's where we're at. I'm going to tomorrow. I know I'm like leaving the page here, but I'm going to tomorrow start putting this into the effect of the upcoming election. And what does it mean? And what are the outliers? And we're going to look at it. And I am going to look at Rick Jackson and Mike Collins in Georgia. And what does this mean in Georgia? Because we know the narrative they're going to spin in Georgia. We know that. But this is a constitutional issue. This is going to go to the Supreme Court, the federal government, because the Save America Act, some of you out there, I don't want to federalize elections, but federal elections play a part, and states have to be responsible to have accurate elections when we're electing federal, officers. We have to. So this being said, the primary source for this in the U.S. Constitution is found in Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1, commonly known as the Elections Clause. The times, place, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature, therefore by the Congress, but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations except as to place cursing senators, replacing a senator. Okay. Now, wait a minute. Let me get this straight. So if you make a new law, you can make a new law, but the Constitution says that elections belong to the state. What that means in practice, state primary authority. The Constitution explicitly delegates the power to dictate every administration of elections, how, when, where people vote to individual state legislatures. This is why procedures like voter ID requirements, early voting windows, and mail-in ballot rules vary so widely from state to state. Now, state rights, you just witnessed that in the Mississippi case on mail-in ballots, counting them after Election Day. The state of Mississippi says you can count a ballot if mailed, postmarked on Election Day. You can count it up to 5 days after that. State of Mississippi says you have then voted. You voted on time. We'll count it when we get to it. And the Supreme Court says you have that constitutional power to do that, whether you want to argue with me or not. Federal override power, the second half of the clause, but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations. Is equally important. It gives the federal government the ultimate authority to step in and establish baseline rules for federal elections. This clause serves as a constitutional backbone for federal legislation like the Voting Rights Act in 1965 and the National Voter Registration Act. Now remember, they were just challenged parts of those in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court knocked them down, right? And sent it back to Louisiana and said, hey, nationally, you can't gerrymander based on race. This is going to come down our elections. And something I told someone this morning on the phone, what I really like is how Donald Trump has had the guts and courage, believe it or not, as president of the United States, to push some things to the Supreme Court, whether we get the ruling we like or not, but he has pushed things to the Supreme Court that others have been cowards to do. Now, I'm going to go past presidential elections for right now. And I want to get into building a constitutional framework that gives states the authority to administer elections. All right. Now, here is a misconception. And this is going to go. You heard Mark Wayne Mullen, right? DHS. And you heard him talk about grants. So the federal government has access to grants that they send to states that help administer elections, federal elections that states oversee. So can they hold the money? Now, something that has been a misconception, the Department of Homeland Security, some people have said, remember, they made election equipment as far as national security. And that's not exactly true. It's not a matter of national security. But it was added under DHS. And let me explain that to you. Jay Johnston, remember Jay Johnston in the Obama administration in 2017? In Biden administration, in 2017. He formally designated U.S. election infrastructure as critical infrastructure subsector, effectively prioritizing its protection as a matter of national security on January 6, 2017. All right? Critical infrastructure as national security. How it intersects with state administration. Building on the constitutional framework that gives the states the authority to administer elections, the DHS designation was designed to navigate the balance between federal security and state autonomy. It's a volunteer federal support by classifying election systems such as voting machines, voter registration databases, and centralized tabulation locations as critical infrastructure. The DHS could offer prioritizing cybersecurity services and threat intelligence sharing to states. Secretary Johnston explicitly stressed that the leveraging this